A powerful bipartisan committee has handed down its report on the government's controversial foreign fighters legislation with 36 recommendations. So the committee recommends that this bill be passed, but it's urging the federal government to water down some key measures, including on the no-go zones and around keeping and storing biometric data on thousands of ordinary individuals at airports. Labor MP Anthony Byrne is the Intelligence and Security Committee's Deputy Chairman. He joins me now from our Canberra studio. Anthony Byrne, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Helen. Good to be here.
Now, your committee has essentially given a tick to this foreign fighters legislation to go ahead, but you've put 36 recommendations onto it. So are you having a bob each way? You say it can go ahead, but you're worried about several key aspects of it.
I think that's a good way of, I wouldn't say bob each way, it's a good way of putting it, it's colloquial. I think the committee was tasked with a very important task, which was to look at legislation that was put forward and advocated for by the intelligence agencies and our security forces and services, and then to look at it and to see what it could do in terms of, we always, with intelligence legislation of this nature, which is quite controversial, Helen, the key thing is to, and there's a demand and a strong demand from the security services and our agencies, is to try and, if it's justified that those powers are needed, to put appropriate safeguards in them. I've always had a philosophy that if you're going to give agencies new powers, you've got to increase oversight and put increased safeguards in.
So do you want the bill watered down by the government?
I don't know if I'd use the term watered down. What I want to see are, these are some of the laws that are here that have been contemplated by the committee, Helen, are quite intrusive laws. And up until fairly recently, if you looked at the report by the National Security Legislation Monitor on provisions like preventative detention orders, control orders, questioning and detention powers, the National Security Legislation Monitor had effectively argued that they be scrapped. Now, we're in a different set of circumstances where the agencies are telling us that they need these powers, that they need to actually even lower the thresholds to access those powers. And so consequently for us, if there's a justifiable need to improve and increase those powers, we need to build in safeguards. And very importantly, to build in sunset clauses.
All right, you call them safeguards, but there has been a fair bit of commentary around whether your committee really did decide that you wanted it watered down. And will Tony Abbott be of a mind that he will water it down? He said he wants it passed in 2 weeks.
Well, none of us are very happy about the time frame. We think that very important legislation like this should be adequately considered. There should be we would have preferred a much longer time frame to look at what is a very large and very substantial bill. That has not happened. Having said that, our committee has had a look at the Foreign Fighters Bill, and we've made what we think are important recommendations to give the legislation that the agencies need and the powers that the agencies need, but at the same time ensure that there are appropriate safeguards.
All right. Well, one of the key areas of concern of your committee is the potential expansion of the powers around this biometric data to stop passport fraud. Now, we currently have, don't we, photos taken on the automated gates at airports. So as you walk through, your photo is taken. They're matched with your passport photos. So that would change to possibly include fingerprints and iris scans. And why don't you want it expanded?
No, that's not the case. In fact, you're talking to one of the major culprits behind seeking to slow down the pace of that transformation in terms of biometric data. If you looked at the evidence in the public hearings, I was quite concerned about the fact that you could have the fingerprints of 8 to 15 million Australians stored on a data system that I wasn't confident about. And the great thing about this committee, Helen, is it enables diversity of view to be held. And if you look at the public evidence, I was of the view that whilst I wouldn't deny the government or the agency or I think it's the Department of Border and Customs Protection, Customs and Border Protection, those powers, what I didn't like was the regulation in the explanatory memorandum that I saw that if we approved this law, which was to enable the fairly uncontroversial storing of biometric data, then by not having to come back into Parliament, what these people could do is then pass fingerprints and also iris scanning. Now, a lot of people are now using iris scanning to access. Yeah, and keep that data. In my view, and my concern remains, Helen, is that iris scanning is used to access computers. Fingerprinting now is access to computers. You could have the largest database in Australia's history of fingerprints and iris scans, and if someone got into it, you can't file away your fingerprints, Helen. You can't change your eyes. They are irrevocable proof of identity. If you have that stolen, you've got a problem. And I think, and I'm very grateful that the committee accepted my viewpoint.
You were very worried about that could be hacked or somehow stolen.
Well, that's what I'd said in public evidence, yes.
Yeah, so what do you think will happen to that area of the bill?
I think what will happen is that the government, I think, is... I'm hoping that the government accepts the recommendations. I would be pretty unhappy to some extent, Helen, if we'd gone through the work, this joint bipartisan committee had gone through the work that the government had asked us, and they did not accept our recommendations in full. We all of us on both sides of politics, in good faith to ensure.
Sorry, at the moment we have a bit of a problem. I mean, to play devil's advocate and to put the government view, a would-be terrorist did manage to get through on his brother's passport last December. Now, how did that happen if we, if the photos are all supposed to be matched to the real person who's boarding the plane?
Well, part of the problem, Helen, is that our committee doesn't have a jurisdiction or remit over that particular department. And so consequently, I'm not in a position to answer that question. I look forward to being provided to give the committee be given a private briefing on that at some stage. So I can't tell you that, but you then can't leap from, well, that happened and therefore you should store the fingerprints of a lot of Australians. I think that's not a good link. Okay,
your committee also wants the government, wants to change the government's ability to declare a terrorist hotspot a no-go zone, making it potentially a crime to travel there, so that whole countries could be declared terrorist no-go zones, couldn't they?
Well, one of the recommendations, Helen, was that we couldn't declare whole countries because that was one of the concerns that was raised in evidence. So that the committee didn't agree with that. It certainly looked at declared areas, but it didn't look at prescribing whole countries. In fact, it recommended against that.
All right, so say if it is just a particular zone is declared no-go rather than a whole country, yet an Australian goes there for innocent reasons, family reasons, will the onus of proof be on that individual to prove their innocence in visiting that no-go zone?
Well, we took evidence to the effect that initially if someone went to an area that was quite clearly a declared area and that declared area was passed by the Parliament of this country, then it's not unreasonable to ask why they were there. Now, some call that reverse onus of proof, some don't. The committee had different views about that, actually, but having said that, I don't think it's unreasonable if you go into an area that's clearly declared by law by the Australian Parliament that you would need to provide a reason why you were there.
All right, and just one of the other big areas is the proposed expansion to preventative detention orders. That also seriously worried the committee. What do you want it to be and why was there such a concern? Was it the length of time people could be held?
It was, I think, when the committee took its evidence, Helen, we looked at what the National Security Legislation Monitor had said in the COAG review, and they were almost recommending that these powers be abolished because they were so infrequently used. What occurred in taking evidence was that the agency said to us, well, in fact, we haven't been using them because we need to lower the threshold where we access them. So accordingly, the committee took that into account. The key point, though, is that because it's such an extraordinary power, the committee decided that if the agencies were to be given that power, and the AFP in particular, that it should have a sunset clause on it, which is 2 years after the next election.
All right, Anthony Byrne, there'll be a lot more discussion, no doubt, about this. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for your time, Helen. Thank you.